we had this really beautiful Rosh Hashiva who used to speak to us. When he was speaking to us, he was already like in his 90s. Wow. And he was from Northbrook. So, and he was still, the place he was the Rosh Hashiva of was still called Northbrook. They had a Northbrook in Jerusalem, which was like, still supposed to represent Northbrook, even though the, the style of Northbrook was no longer in vogue, and he wasn't really, the curriculum wasn't the full Northbrook curriculum, which is a kind of radical Musar curriculum. But he was from it. He was from the radical Musar. I mean, when he was teaching us, I mean, he was a Northbroker, like from in between the wars, in between World War I and World War II. And he may, I don't know, I'm thinking he may have even been a Northbroker before World War I. Anyways, he was really something. When he spoke, the whole room was silent, like you were totally immersed in what he taught. And we were reflecting on the fact that essentially what he would do is just read like a Gemara. He wouldn't even, he wouldn't have to embellish much. He would add a little here, a little there, but he had you completely transfixed. And yet he was like in his 90s. I remember at some point thinking to myself, where, in what other context am I being taught by a man in his 90s? It's just like that was, a thought that would go through your mind. So we were encouraged to like take him back to the yeshiva and develop a bit of a relationship with him. So there were several of us that got to know him a little bit. And I even remember like a moment, it was on Purim, and we went to visit him one year on Purim, and one of my friends, Gershon Zephyrin, who's unfortunately passed away, he brought champagne. And we poured him some champagne, and he made a bracha on it, and then he drank it, and he giggled because it tickled his nose, like the bubble, the carbonation. And he asked us what it was, like why was it carbonated? And we told him it's champagne. He had never had champagne. I mean, he was a Northbroker. He wasn't. Anyways, so he had this injury that was somehow related to a bombing that happened in Israel, but it was like it was like during the second, I don't remember when it was. It was it wasn't a terrorist bomb. I don't know. It was some kind of bombing, maybe in World War II. Something happened in Israel. He had an injury to his leg, and every once in a while he'd be in the hospital with something leg related. So I once went with Mordechai Becher, and I brought him flowers. It was Erev Shabbos, so I figured I'd buy him flowers for the room. It was so awkward. He had no idea why somebody would have flowers. And, like on the, for Shabbos. And his sons were in the room, and they also had no idea. It was one of those awkward moments when I because it was so taken for granted that you buy flowers for the home or flowers for your wife before Shabbos amongst us Americans. But apparently Israelis, and especially Northbrokers, they were so stunned by it and couldn't figure out what it could possibly be for. It was just.
Did they think they were beautiful, though? I mean,
I don't remember if that got across, because the reason Mordechai was bringing it up is because it was one of our most awkward moments. Because we were talking about awkward stuff, and he says, "How about when you bought flowers for Rabbi Brooke?" And we both were just spent a moment reliving the awkwardness of that. We had to be like 20. It must have been like in the, I don't know, the 80s or whatever when it happened. But that was hysterical. Okay. Now on to divorce. From that subject to divorce. All right. So the mitzvah is that he commanded us, if one wants to divorce with a contract under all circumstances. And that is, may he be exalted, saying he shall write her a scroll of divorce. The regulations of this commandment have already been completely explained in Tractate Gittin, which does have a thorough discussion, not only of divorce, but of documents in general, document verification, witnesses on documents, the transfer of documents, how to verify that the contents were written properly, et cetera, et cetera. So he words it, the English translation seems to reflect the Hebrew translation, which is that when they want to get divorced, even in the Hebrew, it emphasized this, if they want to get it, or he wants to get a divorce. Now, technically, biblically, if the husband wants to grant a divorce, it does not require the woman's consent. Whereas Kiddushin, which is how you get married, does require the woman's consent. In fact, there need to be witnesses that see the woman consent to it. So the most important two people at the wedding, besides the groom and the bride, at the Kiddushin ceremony, which is the real sealing of the marriage. In other words, that's the moment they get bound as husband and wife. When the husband, in the way we do it, presents the ring to the wife and she accepts it, that is the moment that they are married. They do not live together as husband and wife until chuppah. We do the two together. They used to, they didn't, so they'd have two separate events. They'd have the Kiddushin event and then the chuppah event. But the Kiddushin is what seals it. They are now married. If they want to separate, they have to get a divorce from the Kiddushin ceremony. The thing that seals the Kiddushin is that he hands her the ring, clearly with the intent to get married. He makes a declaration as such, and then she accepts it. Those two witnesses besides the groom and the bride, they are the two integral components that seal the deal. So when it comes to Kiddushin, she has to concede, to have consent. If she is a minor, her father does it on her behalf. But if she is older than a minor, then she has to show consent, demonstrate consent, which she does by accepting the ring. But when it comes to divorce, that is not the case. When it comes to divorce, biblically, when it comes to a divorce, the woman has to, only the man has to want the divorce. If the man wants to get divorced, he presents this document, which is the get, which we call the get. He presents it to her and they are divorced, whether she wanted to get divorced or not. She does have to receive the document, which means that it does require her receiving it, but it doesn't require her consent. That is biblically. And that was the way it was until around 900 of the Common Era, when Rabbeinu Gershom, amongst his decrees, he decreed that you cannot marry a woman, you cannot divorce a woman against her will, that the woman has to agree to divorce. So that became Ashkenazic custom. It is often called a decree of Rabbeinu Gershom. Rabbeinu Gershom was this massively influential rabbinic figure in Ashkenazic Jewry at that time. He can't actually make a decree in the sense that it's not a rabbinic law. There is no Sanhedrin at the time. He is functioning as a very influential rabbinic figure, but nobody wanted to go against it. So from the time of his decree, in the Ashkenazic world, you cannot divorce a woman against her will. I do not know what the history of divorce, how it played out in Sephardic communities. We tend to think of Sephardic communities as monogamous. They were not. Not monogamous, monolithic. They were not monolithic. Different Sephardic communities had different ways of doing things. And I do not know how it played out there. My understanding is that in present day, in no Jewish community can you divorce a woman against her will. But this is a surprising vocal minority that is not well known, which is the men who are agunas. I have a friend who one time sat me down and told me that it is absolutely essential then whenever you talk about the aguna situation, that you mention that there are men that are not able to get remarried according to Jewish law because their wives will not accept a divorce.
If they have a child with another woman that they're living with, that child is not a mamzer.
Correct, but if you want to do the right thing, which is get married,
well, yeah, sure,
by a rabbi, in other words, and to be accepted within the Jewish community, the Orthodox Jewish community, you can't get remarried. And so I'm not saying there aren't differences. But the fact is, according to this man, he said he is part of a Facebook group, and he personally testifies to the fact that there are many men who have been waiting for their wives to accept a get and who have not accepted a get and will not be remarried. In other words, they can't get remarried. He himself had to wait 3.5 years before his wife accepted the get, and it was used as leverage in their divorce by her attorneys and her, in a similar way that it's used by men as leverage for divorce, and by their attorneys and etc. And so he made a point to me that I should bring it up, so I'm bringing it up. But the most common scenario for an aguna is a case where the husband doesn't want to grant the get. In a case where a husband doesn't want to grant a get, the wife doesn't have many options. Historically, uh, you know, there are stories of men who were beaten up in order to coerce, to sort of coerce them into giving a get. This is a fine line, because if it qualifies legally as a coerced get, it's not an acceptable get. So how is it that they justified beating these people up, and there are all sorts of stories about it, legend about scenarios where they did it. So the argument is, and this is something the Rambam talks about, that there could be times, there's something called kofinoso ad she'omer rotze ani. You force the person until he says, I want to do it. So but even though he said he wants to do it, wasn't he coerced? So the assumption is that deep down, he wants to do the right thing. And if the rabbinic court thinks he should give a divorce, that's the right thing. So deep down, he wants to do a right thing. So when they beat him up, they're just helping him do the right thing.
Aren't there certain cases where a woman can bring grounds for divorce to a mason? I was thinking the thing, like they talk about a tanner. It's such a unpleasant odor that comes from it that it mentions that this would be grounds for divorce. Does the husband have to consent?
So grounds for divorce means that the court tells the husband he has to give her a divorce. And that, whenever you talk about an aguna situation, that has happened. I once sort of interviewed Rabbi Reese about this several years ago, how it works with the CRC. When is a woman an aguna? So he explained to me that usually the way they do it, and this is the usual around the world, this is usually what happens. The court decides that the husband should give her a divorce. There could be all manner of reasons, including she just plain is adamant that she wants a divorce. That could be enough. The movie Get is in a case where she wants the divorce and he doesn't. In the movie Get, she wants the divorce and he doesn't. She doesn't have grounds. In other words, she doesn't accuse him of something or cite something that would be legal grounds for divorce, but she just plain wants to get a divorce. They're in the movie, they're stalling. The court wants them to reconcile. They want them to go to counseling. They want them to talk it over. They're taking their time with it, and it looks like they're going to just take their time forever. And she finally makes some deal with her husband, which is a terrible deal, that she promises him she'll never remarry, because she realized even though he hasn't said it, that's the thing. He just can't stomach the idea that she'd be married to somebody else. So this is like a Greek tragedy. She tells her husband that she'll never she promises, she sort of, on her own, she just goes to him and promises she won't remarry. And then he agrees to grant her the divorce. There, in that situation, there weren't technical grounds for divorce. There doesn't have to be, certainly if there's abuse, that's for sure grounds. Physical abuse, there's grounds for divorce. Even emotional and mental abuse, it is considered grounds for divorce. If the person, and I was involved with a case where the husband was an alcoholic, that was considered grounds for divorce. The court, so in one case in particular, well, let me just say, I spoke to Rabbi Reese. So Rabbi Reese said, once a court decides that they should get a divorce, they invite the husband to come and give her a divorce. If he refuses the first summons, they send a second summons. They don't wait. According to him, they do not wait long for the second summons. But it could be a few weeks. And then they give him a second summons. If he refuses 2 summonses, then he is called a refuser, a masarev, and that's when she becomes an aguna. Because the husband is considered, he's now in contempt of court, essentially, by refusing to come to the court. There could be devices that somebody could use, like decide he's going to switch courts or things like that, or contest jurisdiction, or there might be devices that a person can use to delay how this plays out. But eventually, once he's characterized as a masarev, as somebody refuses, now she's in a case of a guna. So different places have different things. Like in Israel, they can put the husband in jail. They arrest the husband and put him in jail. He sits in jail until he agrees to give her the get. Then this is where those scenarios come up. There have been scenarios. I know there really have been scenarios where husbands have been beaten up or threatened, but I doubt if they're that common. Not my kids told me about certain influencers, like Instagram influencers, who have been active in the last few years and successful in getting these husbands to give a get, because they shame them on the internet, and they also call people to rallies around the husband's house, and they film them and have them, people follow them around to their place of work, and also protests around their families' houses and stuff like that. So apparently, this is a kind of new ground where Instagram influencers are getting involved. It's hard to tell the number of agunas that there are nowadays. The ones that are in like well-known cases are like a handful. There aren't as many. But could there be some that are in the 2 or 3 year kind of stage? Who knows what that number is, especially with, I was involved with one case where I was speaking with the husband, who was close to me, and right after, I was with him like the day he got told by her that she wants a divorce, and it was out of blue. For him, it was out of the blue. So I was close to them. I was with him a lot, and at one point early on, I spoke to him and I got him to promise me. I said, I want you to promise me that you are not going to, your attorneys are going to suggest to you, because this is what attorneys do, that you use this as leverage. You have to promise me you're not going to use this as leverage. You've agreed to give her the get. You can't change your mind. They are going to whisper in your ear. And then, they met with the court one time, and then suddenly he asked if things could be slowed down, because his attorneys essentially had talked to him about taking his time with it. I think what happened was he told them he's going to give her the get, and he's not going to not give her the get. But they said, I think what happened was they said to him, but you don't have to rush it, right? You could slow it down. You don't have to rush it. So he asked the court to slow it down, and the court said, this was a CRC. So the court said, okay. So then I called the CRC and I asked the CRC, what's going on? You're just going to slow it down? Because he said to slow it down. So he said, if the wife asks us to speed it up, we would speed it up. They were waiting for her. How is she supposed to know this? I don't know. So then she went to them and said, I don't want it slowed down. And then the court agreed, and the court did not slow it down. And he did give her the get, but it was, you could see it happening, and you could see why, because these attorneys are trying to fight for the best settlement, for him, and they know, she's going to be fighting for the best settlement for her, and they're trying to use all the leverage. And get is obvious leverage. It's like low-hanging fruit. So attorneys are going to try to exploit it, and on both sides. So it's surprising how many get delayed. I mean, it's not surprising because of that. But I'm just saying, it's people who you would never think would delay giving a get suddenly they're angry with their spouse, and they're both in their worst characters because of what's going on, and then it because of the issue of financial settlement and custody things, their mind gets clouded, and then suddenly they delay it. Now, I'm not saying those are not people who are never going to give a get, but it could be 3 years before, 3.5 years, 4 years before a get is given. And that's a long time. That is an unacceptable long time for it to end up, and I don't know how many of those end up getting classified as agunas, but they are agunas on either side. They are agunas if it's being delayed that long. I do have a scenario. My kids remind me of this, but there was a friend of the family. I was the Masada Kedushin for friends of the family, and I knew the girl from when she was little, and I even studied with the girl for a while. And so I met the couple. I met him for the first time, and we met at Emma's. I think it was called Bagel Country at the time. And she went off to the bathroom or something. It was just me and him. And I looked him in the eye, and I said, "I'm sure you're a great guy, but I want you to look me in the eye right now. And I'm telling you, if for whatever reason this goes to a divorce, and you are feeling like you don't want to give that get, I want you to know I will personally come after you, and I will kill you." And he was trembling, and then she came back and asked what we were talking about, and he said nothing. But there was something in that about him. They've had a wonderful marriage as far as I know, and nothing happened. But yeah,
it's a good thing. It's a good thing you didn't have daughters. You would have made a hell of a father-in-law.
I know. But the thing is that you find yourself in these positions because historically there hasn't been a lot of leverage. Now, Rabbi Reese told me there is now a prenup that was developed by the Rabbinical Council of America, and it is widely used. I even asked Rabbi First if I could use it. This is going back, I don't remember how, quite a few years ago. And Rabbi First said I can use it. It's perfectly okay to use it. And Rabbi Reese said that if you use that prenup, there hasn't been one agona case recorded if you use that prenup. So again, I don't know what the numbers are. I don't know comparatively if you put together that prenup and Instagram influencers and other kinds of things, if we're now seeing a close to the what had been a crisis for who knows how many hundreds of years, a long, slow burning crisis. If we're seeing the end of it, but it does seem like it makes sense that we are. I don't know if somebody's actually looked at the numbers for it. But I had like a couple year disagreement with Aviva Zornberg on this subject, which started with her asking me if I saw the movie Get. And then we got into this thing about agunas. Her original position was that the Beis-Dins should be torn down and rebuilt because there's no way to fix them. That was her original assertion. She told me a couple years later that she has changed her mind and doesn't think they should be torn down and rebuilt. But she, so my argument to her was that every divorce is people acting as their worst selves. And it's unfair. This is what I argued. I changed, obviously I modified this position, and it was her, that was her arguing with me. That was part of my modifying it. But I argued to her, first of all, my parents are divorced. Okay. I've always felt that the children suffer when parents get divorced but have no voice in whether parents should get divorced. And I've always felt I love my parents, and I'm sure it was the right thing for them to get divorced, but I've always felt it's often a lazy decision by parents to get a divorce, and the children, again, have no voice So when I watched the movie Get, I don't remember if they had kids, but like in my mind, telling them to take more time to work it out is what every kid would want a judge to tell his parents. So I admit that I am not objective at looking at this scenario, and I'm not seeing it. But I suggested to her that that every divorce is messy. So if you put a lens on cases that happen within a Jewish court, it looks horrible. But every divorce looks horrible. If you put not every, but most divorces are horrible looking. If you put a lens on divorces in Finland, if you put a lens on divorces in Spain, if you put a lens on divorces in England, in Canada, wherever you put a lens on a divorce, it looks horrible. It's shocking what people are saying to each other, what they're doing, what the lawyers are trying to do. It looks shocking. So the fact that we're horrified by the divorces that you see in Beis-Din, this was my original argument. I have modified it. But my original thing was so that divorce in general is sloppy and messy, and who knows? Let's look at divorces worldwide and see how long does it take to settle, typically on average, to settle a custody dispute in a family. How long does it take? And do the sides tend to feel that they were fairly treated? Do husbands tend to feel that they're fairly treated when it comes to custody things? In other words, it could be that this is a worldwide problem that the rabbinical courts are being focused on, but it's not just a problem of rabbinical courts. Maybe it's a problem in courts worldwide when it comes to divorce because they're so messy and ugly. And I actually, stupidly, I had a young guy who was studying economics at University of Chicago who wanted to spend the summer studying with me. And I said to him, I'm working on this subject. These economics guys are, one of the things they do is gather data. It's a big part of what they do is gather data and figure out a strategy for gathering data. So I set up a challenge for us. Let's see if we can get this kind of data. How long does it take for people on average to work through a divorce? What is the picture look like afterwards? Is there any side that feels like the other side has an unfair advantage? Try to get data. and how many actual agunas are there? How do you figure out what agunas are? That kind of stuff. Oh, it was a mess. I was way too deep in. That was the beginning of my disagreement with her. But then as I'm going through it, I realized the whole thing is stupid, and it doesn't matter what data says. It matters what the woman involved in it thinks, and who cares what happens in Finland? It shouldn't be happening in Basin. And I came around to realizing that the best thing that a person could do is try to make it easier for a woman who's in this process, and not try to think about the other things. And so in the end, I would say she mentored me on the whole thing. And my best explanation for my pig-headedness in the whole thing is that as a child whose parents got divorced, I had a issue with being objective in the whole thing. But anyways, my hope is that we have gotten to a point where we now have the tools to make sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen. By the way, I also know from somebody else who's involved with the CRC getting a divorce that the CRC now has a woman advocate. Well, she's not an advocate. She's not a lawyer for her, but she's, in other words, once there is a couple that come to the CRC about getting a divorce, there is a woman whose role it is to help the woman navigate the process in her best interest. So that was I think a wonderful advance in how the process works. And anyways, okay. So it's 3 lines in the Rambam, but deserves probably 6 months of discussion. And
Definitely.
tonight we are celebrating the marriage between Hashem and the Jewish people.
Yes.
And while some people experience the last 2,000 years as a bumpy divorce, we know we're still married and are renewing our marriage bonds tonight.